I was recently watching the documentary Jurassic Punk about the life of Steve Williams, a computer animator and artist who has played a huge role in the development of modern movie making. This because he was a participant and perhaps one of the most important participants in the special effects of movies like The Abyss, Terminator 2, and Jurassic Park. Now, this documentary has nothing to do with metal music or punk music for that matter. So you might be wondering, well, how is this related to anything? Is this a sponsored content or something? But no.
Contract or no, I will not bow to any sponsor.
The reason why I'm bringing it up is that the movie pays a lot of attention to the issue of producer driven movie making or business oriented filmmaking. This is not to say that this is a new phenomenon, but at least that the claim that the movie makes is that from Jurassic Park onwards, the ability to just throw money at special effects and creating any garbage that you want on screen has changed the shape of filmmaking in a way that is not necessarily positive and which in fact is not really artistic.
The corporations have just kind of taken everything over and fucked everything up. But they can still sell, lots of Coca-Cola, and crummy superhero movies.
The reason why I thought that this was so interesting is that on the same day that I watched this documentary, I went on to have a very interesting conversation with Scott Ian Lewis of the band Carnifex. Now, in this interview, the beginning of which is just devoted to discussing a little bit the business side of the music business, you will see how this phenomenon of a top-driven art, of art that has as its first limitation business considerations, is something that regrettably is affecting music. Companies like Live Nation and Ticketmaster have now purchased a lot of venues and are exercising such a level of control that whether you like it or not, what you are able to do as an artist will start to change because of their bottom line. Now, there is a lot that can be said about Live Nation, and the majority of which is not positive. They are, I would say, an infestation in the music business, as is Ticketmaster, and they are going to end up killing this industry if they are not stopped. A lot can be said as well about the fact that Live Nation is owned by the Saudi Sovereign Fund, and meaning that it is a company that directly benefits the Saudi regime, a regime that regularly executes people and forces women and sexual minorities and religious minorities to live as second-class citizens. So there are also some very big ethical considerations about giving money to an organization that directly goes to fund war criminals and human rights violators. So in this roundabout way, I think that this interview that we're going to see today with Scott Ian is going to be actually very interesting, even if you don't like Carnifex. Now, of course, if you like Carnifex and you are interested in what they are doing, you can watch the first part, but then on the second part, we also discuss Necromantium, their new album, as well as Scott Ian's own graphic novel, which there are some news there that I think you're going to enjoy. And hopefully you're going to be interested in that as well. So I think that this is actually very interesting, very educational. There are things that I learned about the music industry and about some of the money issues that are affecting bands. And hopefully you're going to find that interesting as well. And based on that knowledge, make perhaps smarter business decisions or smarter decisions as a consumer when it comes to the companies that you're giving your money to. You've been touring a lot since the end of the pandemic, and a period that really affected the music industry. So how does it feel to be back? Because I know that when it started, you quite publicly complain about the enormous financial hit that some of the cancellations represented, which, makes perfect sense. The music industry was certainly affected enormously by what was happening. So how does it feel to be back?
It's fantastic. I mean, being able to work again is wonderful, and that's really kind of what it boiled down to. I've been in Carnifex 18 years, and I've been a full-time touring musician since 2006. So to go from 2006 all the way until 2020 with a job that you worked very hard for, that each year it's not guaranteed. You really have to prove yourself each year, each record, each tour. the music industry is a pretty unforgiving place. If you can't make money and be successful, there's really no spot for you. And so to kind of fight all those fights of just trying to survive as a touring musician, and then with the pandemic and not being able to work, it was very challenging because all of a sudden you have, five grown men who had been making their living off of music, that have rent, mortgage, all the bills, other people relying on them. We have our crew. We have four full time crew members. So really, you have nine people all of a sudden that just can't work for a living. Not by anything we did wrong. It just was the circumstance of the world. And so dealing with that was super hard. And yeah, I vented those frustrations. We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, not just on that tour that was canceled, but through that year. And then it's not just the time you lose working, it's the time you lose making up for the time you didn't work. So while we didn't work for a year and a half, none of the bills stopped. All the bills kept coming. So all of a sudden we're incurring all this debt now. Taxes are a big one. Taxes kept rolling in, all that stuff. And so you get back to work in summer of 21. So after a year and a half of being off, and it was awesome because the fans had never been more supportive. Uh, the merch was great. The ticket sales were great. The energy was great. But now you're also kind of on the business side, you're making up for a year and a half of lost time. And you're making up for a year and a half where you incurred a bunch of debt that you wouldn't normally have incurred. And then the cherry on top is a lot of the expenses in the touring business increased quite a bit. So transportation you basically doubled, went up, twice as much essentially. Obviously, fuel is very expensive now. Um, Merchandise is more expensive. The venues are charging. You've probably seen the merch rates for the venues, right? So venues raise their merch rates. Um, just your crew is more expensive because the crew members are trying to make up for their lost time because they didn't work either. So it's still, we're still in the fallout of the damage, that financial damage that was caused by the pandemic. We're still like fighting out of that. Now we're starting to get past whatever financial challenges we may have, but the financial challenges that the industry presents as far as cost, those actually just keep going up. Literally every tour we've done since the pandemic, overhead has gotten higher. So what that means is ticket prices get higher. You've probably seen merch is way more expensive now. And then it also means it's less money going to the band members. So it's been challenging, no question.
Now, I think that a lot of people, when they see a band touring, the only thing that they think about is the fact that there are five people on stage, and that is the only cost. But as you mentioned, there are of course all of these ancillary costs on the side. But one
Mhm.
of the things that I believe many people don't get is that of merch rates that you have to pay in a venue. Could you elaborate a little bit on how that actually works for a band?
Yeah, well, so first off to say that merch rates aren't necessarily new, but what we are seeing that's giving it more attention is, during the pandemic, Live Nation and AEG. So this is more specific to the United States, but also probably the UK as well. But during the pandemic, when these local and independent promoters and venue owners were obviously experiencing the same financial troubles we were because no shows were coming through, you have Live Nation and AEG. These are massive international conglomerates with billions of dollars in the bank, publicly traded companies. They took advantage of that, I guess, distress that those independent promoters were in, and they went and they bought hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of venues, and not just at the high level. So not just big rooms or big theaters, all the way down to like 400 and 500 cap bars, essentially. Okay, so you introduce all this hyper corporatization into your local music bar. Well, what happens? Well, the only reason a publicly traded company exists is to generate revenue. That's it. It's actually in the rules of them being a publicly traded company. They have to operate in the interest of the shareholders, which is generate revenue. That's it. Beginning, middle, end. That's the only reason they exist. So if you introduce that into the local music scene, what do you think that brings with it? Well, a beer is $12 now. Ticket prices, not only do ticket prices go up, but ticket fees, which the band is actually cut out of that revenue, ticket fees go up. So that's a whole nother conversation we can get into, but we'll stay on point here. And then of course, merch rates, right? So like I said, merch rates have always been around, but now that you've introduced this corporatization into venues at all levels of the music business, now merch rates are very prevalent, very common, and they're not 5 or 10%. They're 20, 25, 30%. Oh, and by the way, they're going to collect the local taxes as well, which I would guess they never actually give to anybody. They just keep. I've never seen any proof that those funds actually go anywhere. That's just my opinion. And then also when you ask for any type of receipt, so you, the artist, can write off the merch rate as a deduction, which it would be, they don't want to provide you with any receipt. So they don't want any record of how much money you've given them, which, like I said, that's just questions. I have no idea what's happening with it, but you could probably guess. So that's why you're seeing more and more artists push back against this merch rate, because what was once, it's 15% at 1 or 2 nights a week. Okay, I guess we can live with that. Now it's 20 to 30% every night of the week, everywhere we go. And so now obviously it's becoming, kind of an issue, because really, if you want to get into the details of the merch rate, it gets kind of complicated, and maybe it's a bit boring for the listeners, but here's the details on the merch rate. The merch rate is a tool that the agents and the managers use to leverage a better deal for the performance. Now, follow me on this one. Agents and managers commission off the gross. Okay, so if, let's say I'm an agent or a manager, and I go to a venue and I say, my band needs $5,000 a night to play. And that venue, that promoter says 5,000 is too much. And then I come back and I say, okay, keep it at 5,000, but I'll let you have a 25% merch rate. Okay. So the promoter does his math and realizes 25% merch rate, that's $1,500. It means really I'm getting this band for 3,500. Okay. But let's go back to that original, where the agents and the managers make their money. They make it off of commissioning from the gross. So if I can keep the guarantee at 5,000, give away 25% in merchandise, which doesn't affect my commission, I can make more money off the band by violating my fiduciary duty to my artist by saying, sure, have a merch rate. Now I get a commission on 5,000, even though the promoter didn't want to pay 5,000, but I gave away the band's merch money, which is a violation of their fiduciary duty, which is illegal.
Hello. I was talking with some friends about this interview, and I realized that the term fiduciary duty is not as commonly well known as I would have expected it to be. So, just a very quick explanation. If I have a fiduciary duty towards someone else, that means that I have a legal obligation to protect their interests.
But that's what we're seeing right now all across the music industry. And a big reason is managers, agents are in bed with the promoters, with the venues. They don't actually really have that much of a commitment to their bands. Some do, but most don't. Their commitment is to the venue, because that band is probably going to come and go. Live Nation's not going anywhere. So they need the relationship with the promoter. So we've kind of entered a territory where you're realizing that you're seeing essentially collusion between agents, managers, and the venues, and they're violating the fiduciary duty to their artists. But artists have no unions. We have no protections. We have no collective bargaining. So it's kind of anything goes. There's no rules in the music industry. It's just whatever you can do, you can do, Here's it comes back to this attitude that we've run into in the music industry all our career, which is all the people on the industry side, they're hardworking professionals. All the musicians, oh, you guys are on vacation. You're lucky to be here. And I suppose you could have that attitude. But really, you completely are invalidating the people that you supposedly work for. If all the managers and the agents and the promoters and the labels all are here for the artists, but they're all telling the artists, your job's not real, but I send emails for a living. My job's real. I think that's the tail wagging the dog. And what happens is you have industry people that think they're actually the culture makers and they're the shot callers and they're the ones that are, putting their art into the zeitgeist. When really, you're sending emails for a living. Essentially, AI could do your job. Everything starts with the artist, but there's a lot of egos in the music business, and there's a lot of failed musicians on the industry side. And admitting and accepting that is not something that they're going to want to do. And it's not something they have to do because it's a free for all. There's no bar to entry and there are no rules.
Do you feel that when you were, 18 years ago and you were just starting in the music business, when indeed for many people it is a dream come true, I am going to be able to make money from this thing that I am creating. Do you think that looking at it from rose-colored glasses in a way prevented you from making better business decisions at the beginning, or do you think that you were careful enough back then?
No, I didn't know the difference back then. And I had no idea that, when I was 20, I had no idea that 18 years later, I'd still be in a band. I didn't have that type of vision, I guess. I was very focused kind of day to day. What's the next show we're going to get? What songs are we working on right now? This record that we're putting out, are we doing everything to promote it? I didn't necessarily have the ability to look all these years into the future and predict what might happen. And also, when we started in 2005, the industry was quite different. MySpace was the only social media company, and it hadn't even really been adopted by all the kind of corporate stuff yet. There were no businesses on MySpace. Like, obviously businesses use social media now. That wasn't the thing back then. And there wasn't even YouTube, man. That's how freaking old we are. There wasn't even, YouTube was 2007. We'd already put out a full-length record by the time YouTube showed up. So it was a very, different time. There was no Spotify. There's no Apple Music. They didn't even have the iPhone yet. This is how old we are.
What do you think is the best way for, in the case of your particular band, of course, for fans who like your music and want to support you? What is the best way to do that, right? Because he said streaming, of course, is the least beneficial way from a financial perspective, I guess. But is it buying merch? Is it going to the show? Is it buying physical copies directly from you? What is the best way to get money to the band in the case of Carnifex?
The most direct way is merch. That's where it gets split the least ways, And then second is go to a show, buy a ticket. That's why we tour so much. That's why we got back to touring so quickly, is because our business is we're live entertainment. That's our business. That's where the bulk of our money comes from. Selling tickets, selling T-shirts. We've never really made money on our music ever. When we were in our Victory deal, we never got any royalties, none. We sold over 100,000 albums for them. I never saw any money. And you can do the math on that. That's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were completely cut out of. And then as we moved later in our career, streaming took over. And as you mentioned, the split points on streaming are really not in the favor of the artist. And in fact, interestingly enough, they're not even in the favor of Spotify. You can do a quick Google search and you'll see that Spotify loses hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So figure that one out. We let a company that essentially walked in and disrupted the music industry. It was the race to zero, and that company doesn't even make money. They operate at a loss, and they're only able to do so because they're publicly traded. That's a whole nother animal to get into.
One of the things that have always fascinated me about your band, and it's about your lyrics, really, because they separate from the music itself, separate from the what some people might call deathcore sound, they are in and of themselves really powerful, painful, and meaningful. This negativity in a way is something that I can relate to. I think that many metal fans can relate to. If negativity and metal fans and metal bands, if we have a Venn diagram, it's not a perfect circle, but it gets pretty close to that perfect circle. Why do you feel attracted to those topics? And as you've grown older, as you have hopefully, improved your quality of life, has it become difficult to perhaps reach those darker topics or those darker sentiments as you write the lyrics?
Well, I've had my own arc as an individual outside of the songs. And I've learned things about songs that I wrote years ago that weren't apparent to me when I wrote them. And what I've really come to realize now that I've processed a lot of these different emotions is that really these albums are just therapy. And if you think about what therapy is, you go in and you talk to someone, but what are you talking about? You're talking about all the negative stuff. You're talking about all the bad stuff, the stuff that you don't necessarily want to tell the people around you. And after you purge that, you actually feel better. You walk out of there feeling better. Maybe you cried. Maybe you got angry. Maybe you didn't want to talk about it, but you did anyway. The point is once you got it out, you're able to then start moving past it. And that's what I've come to realize what all these records are. They're just therapy. They're just getting past these challenges and these frustrations. And those records exist to be there for the listeners and be their therapy, just like they were my therapy. I just was on a different side of it, but it'll serve the same function if you can find them relatable. And so, going forward, yeah, things have improved for me a lot internally. And I think that's why Necromantium in particular is a more outward looking record. And I'm dealing with more ambiguous topics and universal topics about life, existence, what comes next, purpose, meaning, those types of things. And it's less inward looking, like maybe Graveside was, or Die Without Hope, something like that.
Is Necromantium a concept album? Because I was looking at the press release I got from Nuclear Blast, and it seemed to put forward a story. Decades ago, wealthy intellectuals began installing
psychomantium in their homes, a secret room completely filled with mirrors or a single mirror and in complete darkness, in order to speak to the dead in other dimensions and gain their knowledge. It was often used as a healing tool to help dissolve grief or considered a form of prophecy. Necromantium presents the concept: what if you could use that kind of room to speak with death itself? What secrets of the world could you uncover from a direct conversation with the Grim Reaper? Not a monster, but a fellow intellect.
So is this a story? Is this a concept album?
I suppose it is. Not necessarily like a tight concept, like song one is part one, song two is part two. Not necessarily like that. But it does. The album does deal with the same concept. And going to the press release, yeah, that was kind of the quote they hung on to from our discussion. But really, that was just the jumping off point for me. It was this idea that 100 or 120 years ago, when you wanted to talk to the dead, you went and talked to a doctor. That's kind of interesting if you think about that. And stuff like seances and rituals and using a psychomantium, that was all considered very intellectual. And you needed to talk to, someone who had deep insight, like a doctor, in order to get those answers. And so that was my jumping off point of, like, no matter where we have been in society, we're always trying to figure out what's on the other side. And at that time, I thought it was really interesting that, yeah, if you want to do a seance, you need a doctor. And it's just like, wow, I wonder if 100 years from now, we're going to be looking back and looking not only just as silly, but still asking the same question. That was very interesting to me.
And finally, you are more than just a musician, because you also wrote a graphic novel, Death Dreamer. Why did you decide to pursue that, and can we expect more?
Yeah. So why did I write it? I'm a writer. I love writing. That's I've maybe prioritized writing too much in my music versus vocal performance. I know the vocal performance is really where the public interest is now, and your lyrics are basically don't mean that much. But I'd always been drawn to the lyrics. You know, that's been me from the beginning. Was it was always about the writing, and from working on so many records, it is very formulaic. You're trapped into a certain format. And I wanted to move beyond that as a writer. And so I wrote Death Dreamer. And as far as its follow up, the book actually has a publisher now, which is very exciting. I haven't really shared that yet because we're in the production process. But the book is going to come out with a publisher, and it's going to come out. I originally had planned it as a trilogy. Now it's the full series is going to come out in one graphic novel, and I think that's supposed to be coming out in 24. So about within the next year.
Like an omnibus book with the entire Death Dreamer saga.
Yes, so it'll be like over 100 pages.
That's really cool, dude. Congratulations. That must feel really great.
It is. Yeah, I mean, I'm finishing writing it right now because, like I said, I had written it as a trilogy, so I had the second one done. And then when we, started talking with this publisher and they said how they wanted to release it all in one shot, then it's like, oh, okay, I got to go write part 3 right now. So I've been writing part 3 for the last 3 months.
We have 5 minutes. So in those 5 minutes, tell me, what are your favorite graphic novels? Because I love graphic novels. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite one was Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but that was an adaptation from a film. So some people say that doesn't count. Watchmen.
Yes.
I love Watchmen. And there's a lot of awesome Batman ones. The Batman IP has so many different little stories in different worlds. Death in the Family. I'm not sure if you ever knew that one.
When Robin gets killed. Yeah.
Right, exactly. When Robin gets killed. What's the Joker one?
Killing Joke?
Killing Joke. Yeah, I was like looking for my books. I have it right over here. I was gonna go dig through it. Yeah, Killing Joke. Those I love those ones because I love Batman. That was the superhero that I liked first, like as a kid. And so to see them do like the very like mature, serious stories now as an adult, I love reading those.
Scott, thank you so much for what was really a very interesting conversation. I really appreciate that you gave me all of that background on the business because I think it's really, really.
I hope it wasn't too dry.
On the contrary, everybody can see, I would say, about 100 other interviews when you're going to be talking about Necromantium. So I think that it is fantastic to have an opportunity to discuss something a bit different and also to get a different perspective on the difficulties of the music business. That it's not just tacos and strippers all the way down. So
I wish.
Scott, thank you so much. Have an amazing weekend, and I'll see you on tour, man. Take care of yourself.
Okay. Take care of yourself, man. See ya.
Bye.